Hi everyone. Hi everyone, I'm Kat. Today I'm going to talk about some advice for novice programmers. So I used the title of a nursery rhyme to indicate the nature of the talk. Before I start, can I just get a sense of who's new to Python? And then who's new to programming completely? All right, good. Okay. I was a little worried that there'd be no beginners at all. So what is this talk about? So I've programmed in a couple languages, Python for several years, and then Haskell more recently. So I thought I might take some experiences that I've learned from learning a new language back into Python. So I'm going to compare a little bit of object-oriented programming with functional programming. And then I'm going to share the insights, which is if you're right-brained and visual, like I'm a left-handed person. So for me, sometimes thinking logically can be hard, but it is possible to look at programming in a right-brained visual way. It's important to publish readable code. It's not just writing a lot of lines of code, but make sure it's readable. And then lastly, it is also possible to code with just the text editor. Don't worry about having an IDE like Eclipse. So a little bit about me. I've worked with Python for several years, mostly for research, some data science, and then some web development. And some of you may recognize me from being a New York City Python and PyLadies organizer the last few years. But in the past year or so, I've been more in the Haskell world. And I just want to give a quick plug for an online course that I created earlier this year. If you want to learn the basics of data science, you could sign up, and that's a discount code right there. So anyway, back to the talk. Main points, I'm going to tell you three advice, and then a little demonstration at the end. So the first one, plumbing is usually boring. 2, there's no I in team. And 3, a year from now, you'll wish you started today. So on to the first. Plumbing is usually boring. So plumbing is not glamorous, but it's very necessary. It's like you wake up in the morning, you turn on your hot water or cold water, brush your teeth. Like you don't really have to think about where water came from. But somebody had to design how to get water from point A to point B. And when you program, that's really what it is. You're getting data values from point A to point B. Now, Python is an object-oriented language, which means it uses a noun-oriented view. So you will describe objects or classes, and these classes can have attributes. So this is great when you have fixed operations on things where you don't have to do too much. You're just describing objects. So an analogy here, you have sneakers, you have sandals, they're both shoes. And both of them have attributes, such as material, size, brand, and then you could calculate certain functions for it. But say you want to scale this up to a collection of shoes or a warehouse full of shoes. And then maybe you'll want to alphabetize by brand or sort by the shoe size, maybe even sort by color. So then these are functions that create more operations. And so to do that, you want to abstract and think about no matter the size of the collection of shoes, if you perform the same process for it, then you have an abstract function for that. So if you think of these functions as abstract, you can then compose functions and reduce the amount of repeated code. So an example of that here in the picture is the TSA checkout line. So as long as your stuff fits in the bin, it'll go through the conveyor belt. And so that's all you have to worry about, just fitting things into that bin. So if you think of programming that way, it's not so much, let me make sure this is typed correctly, but if it fits in the data structure, it fits in the type, then it'll work. So an example of actual code. Here in the functional style, you have little functions that are very simple. And then when you read it, you can tell, do my stuff, but it's print the greeting, which is just hi. Or if you want to reverse the list, you just flip it around. And that is just an easy way to read it. So we want to focus on functions because they're easier to compose, which is, it just means it's easier to use them. And then functions, you want to focus on making sure they have the same output every time, so don't, or I guess avoid side effects from your functions. You want to keep it simple, so you want to limit the scope and functionality for each function. So an example here, you just want to return whatever it is you do and keep the fewest amount of actions possible in a function. So recapping that, look at it like pipe connections. Just look at the type of function. So maybe you're passing back an integer, maybe you're passing back a string, and then that way you're just worrying about the connections rather than the object itself. So this is almost like a built-in unit test. It's not literally a unit test, but this is just an easier way to manage your code. Okay, so on to point 2. There's no I in team. And again, programming is not about the glamour. It's really about working well with others and even yourself. Unreadable code, it slows you down because maybe you're handing off your code to somebody else. You didn't write documentation, you didn't write comments. If you're leaving a project and somebody else is taking over, maybe you've also taken on a project where you're just like, I don't know what this code is about. Or if you're coming back to your own code years later, depending on how you wrote it, that can impact how quickly you pick it up again. So do you really want to spend hours figuring out if something was a typo, like if a bug was just the typo of a keyword versus an actual value that was wrong? So back to that example from before, which is easier to read? Do you want a function with a lot of stuff happening, or do you want simple functions, and then it's easier to trace the logic of the program that you're writing? So some tips on writing more readable code. First of all, there's the PUP8 style guidelines, and that would be the style guidelines for things like indentation, the line length, commenting. It's kind of like when you have like APA or MLA writing style guidelines. It's just how it's formatted in your file. Next, at another level, you want to look at your code simplicity. Consider it like poetry. You want to be terse, yet eloquent. Writing simple functions can help you manage complexity better. It's easier to maintain code. And just keep in mind, avoid side effects. Try to get the same output every time for each function. So that focusing on that will help abstract your code. Perform assertions of type. So when you write a function, if you know what type should be passed in and you know what type should be coming out of that function, that'll help a lot with your programming and help you move along quicker. And to recap this point, there's no I in team, and you'll thank yourself later if you publish readable code. Point number 3. A year from now, you'll wish you started today. So if you're learning a program, you might think, oh my gosh, there's so much to learn. But if you start now to learn a little bit, it's better than waiting next year to start a little bit. So baby steps all the way. So remember, it's kind of similar to gardening. You want to plant the seed first, nurture that, and then it'll grow over time. Aim for done first, not perfect. We all have to start somewhere. And lastly, you don't need fancy tools to get things done. Here's a Gantt chart which shows, maybe you plan on having certain steps in a project, but you really need to start with the first step. So, start somewhere, start small, get something done so you can move on to the next. So maybe if you break it down into features that you want to build, start with one, move on to the next. To do that, all you need is a text editor, and there's a lot of free or low-cost options. There's Sublime Text, Vim, Emacs, PyCharm, and then searching through your code, you can use something like Silver Searcher, and if you install that, you could just look for functions, and it'll show you where it's defined. It can maybe show that at the end of the demonstration if there's time. So where to learn programming if you're new to Python? You could check out the book, Learn Python the Hard Way. Videos, there's a great learning platform called Treehouse. They have tons of videos there to help you learn. You can also go to local user groups. So the New York City Python has study groups, office hours 3 times a week. Definitely check it out. And to recap this last point, plumbing, or recap the whole presentation, plumbing is boring. Coding is not the same as regurgitating document specifications. You're building something, so you want to look at how you connect pieces. And then you also want to have the ability to reason about the type of the data value that you're working with. And just a picture of pipe connectors to help emphasize that point. All right, so now onto an example application, a very simple Flask app. So what do we want to do? Let's make a dashboard that shows the latest Yeezy sneakers sold on eBay. So we're going to use the eBay API, connect to that, and then display results from that. Let me show you what that is going to look like. So here it is. If I refresh this, hopefully the internet works. Yes, okay. So this is the latest stuff shown on eBay. And then what I did here was to show all the thumbnails and then calculate total price listed and then the average of that. So we have here strings and number values. All right, so the steps. So what I will show is how do you connect to the eBay API? How do you get the image URLs from those results? And then how do you calculate prices and the average? And then how do you send these values to the Flask templates? And then at the end, ta-da, hopefully it all works. So number 1, connect to the eBay API. You need to install you can, I guess, write it from scratch, but I use this library called eBay SDK. You install it through pip, and then you can connect to it using your settings. You do have to go to the eBay developer site to get your API key. Once you connect, you can send in a keyword saying, this is what I want to search for. I search for Yeezy. And then the items are returned. So in my file, in this Flask, oh wait, that's not working. There. So in Flask, you have an app.py file that shows the routes, and then here I've defined how to get it. And here, API connect, I'm sending in what I want to search for and getting the results back. And then getting the image URLs from those results. What I have here is asserting the type just to make sure that there is a value, because sometimes there might not be values. And we want to avoid that error. So if there is no thumbnail image, then we just want an empty string. And here I have try both the large picture and the small picture. So eBay calls it gallery plus picture URL and gallery URL. And I was able to save this all in one file. I mean, the code management is up to you, but I did this in one file. So I have it here. When I get the results, I wrote a function, get the thumbnail, and then the thumbnail is right here. So if I wanted to edit what's returned and saved for the URL, I could probably go in here and change the value. So that makes it easier to manage. Oh, and if anybody has questions, feel free to interrupt me if I'm going too fast or something. Yeah. Okay, number 3, get the prices and calculate the average. Now we want to get, because these are strings that are returned, we want to convert them to numbers. So first we get the price, so we get the items, selling status, current price value, so that they have in the JSON a nested data structure, and so that's how I got to the value itself. And then from there, I can calculate the average by putting it all into a pandas data frame, getting that one column of data, and then performing the mean calculation of the sum. Actually, yeah, this is semantically not the best, but I think you get the point. So again, here I have get price, and then get the price will return this. Oh, wait. So I have here getting the price of the item, and then later calculating that in a different function. Now here's where it gets a little bit more web development specific. You want to send the values to the template. And so you save whatever data structure you have, and then you save it into a context, which then you can use the Flask's render template function to send all that data into whatever HTML file you're looking at. So for me, yeah, so I have here use the index file, and in there I have a loop that goes through the data structure that I passed in, and then for each one I'm able to create a thumbnail. All right, so that was basically it. I know I went through that pretty fast. Does anybody have any questions at this point? What's Pandas? Pandas is a library for doing statistical calculations with data.
Can you mention for the API mention a little bit more, like, because not in the slides, but like in the Sublime.
Oh, sure. Okay, so. Okay, so this stuff here, what we really need is just the keywords part, but I added this extra stuff just to make sure that the stuff returned is avoiding keychains, posters, baby clothes, like non-shoe items. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess I was just wondering, like, why you had to exclude the categories instead of just like picking the category of shoes.
That is because of eBay's API. Like, they don't have just like search only one category. They have search everything but exclude certain ones. Yeah, I don't know why they did that. Any other questions? All right. So yeah, that's the end of my presentation. Comments, anything?